Perfect Blue, directed by Satoshi Kon. When I came across this movie on Shudder, looking for horror movies to do for the month of October to get into the spirit of the season, I was very surprised to see this movie in there, considering that the title kind of gives me like Louis Vuitton fancy high-end perfume commercial vibes, you know? And I don't want to say this, but I'm going to say it. The fact that it was animated made it being in the horror section all the more surprising and appealing as well. So I went ahead and pressed play on it, and wow, it was a complete experience that I was not ready for. This was unexpectedly a very vibrant, grounded, and yet surreal Zodiac meets La La Land combination of a movie. I was pleasantly surprised by its runtime being only an hour and 20 minutes, which is like rare as fuck nowadays. So that added to its appeal. And I was also pleasantly surprised by the fact that the inciting incident for this story happens within the first 10 minutes, and what follows is a very cerebral, almost true crime story told through the lens of an unreliable narrator, both in the form of our main character and the camera work that accompanies the movie. Both sell it completely. The magic of this movie lies, like I said, very vibrant in its visuals, its visual storytelling. It's a movie that is chock full of detail, both in like shot composition and editing and general cinematography. The environments are animated but feel as real, if not almost uncannily familiar, to the way they portray real life in a sort of like almost liminal sense. It's familiar and nostalgic, but also a little off-putting. And it takes place in Japan, which is a country we haven't even been to, and it tells the plights of Japanese idol culture in a way that makes it relatable, I would say. The environments, they pluck you right in. The venue at the beginning, sweeping all the shots through the crowd on an otherwise normal feeling weekend day, the cold office environments, the artificial lighting and stuffiness on a TV set or a business building, like a corporate office building, the hustle and bustle of the city, the aisles of a manga shop, the coziness of home that can quickly turn against you, the feeling of exposure, the feeling of complete unsafe isolation. You pair all that with a very gripping narrative driven by our unreliable narrator, and you get a movie that all the way till the end has you confused, and then it has you thinking you know what's going on, and then it sort of completely turns on you at the end. There's a lot to love with the visuals, like I said, the camera going up as close and personal as it needs to, lingering on certain things that make you wonder, why are we lingering on this? Scenes that bleed seamlessly into each other, that sort of lend to the surreal, what's real and what's not energy of the movie. And then you also have a lot of symbolic imagery that is striking and layered and very detailed, and makes you want to go back and comb through and see if you can reinterpret certain scenes in a certain way or in a different way. Like I said, it's a crisp hour and 20 minutes long, uses its time wisely in the way it sets up the world and its characters. The first act will lull you in with underlying and very unclear where it's coming from ominous vibes, tension, and creepiness. The second act completely goes off the rails in terms of clarity and plot. in a good way. And then the third act gives some answers while also recontextualizing the rest of the movie in a way that makes you ask even more questions and honestly necessitates probably 2 more views after that. I go into many movies blind, this one mostly included. I had heard it's about a girl going through a career change, but I wasn't ready for what I got. And as I watched this movie, I came to find out that it inspired Black Swan, which had me mulling a bit in my head as I watched it. There was a YouTube video with a comment which said, "Incredible how this movie makes Black Swan look unoriginal." And to a degree, I almost agree, but I've come to the conclusion that they both have enough merit and style on their own to stand by themselves. Perfect Blue gets a 7 out of 10. Titane, directed by Julia Ducournau. When I showed this movie to my best friend, he turned to me and asked me, bewildered as fuck, "Why do you like this movie?" When I showed it to my boyfriend, he fully checked out of it by the end. And being completely honest, the fact that this one is such a challenging watch adds a lot of allure for me. But more than that, if I had to put into words how I particularly see this movie and why I find it so memorable, it's the fact that through a very ugly and brutal lens, we get to find some sort of art and beauty in the setting and its characters. It's a movie that doesn't clearly spell anything out, allowing the viewer to come to whatever conclusions they may come to, like staring at an abstract piece of art that just speaks to you. One could ask very valid questions about the narrative, like why doesn't the world this character exists in fully function like the real world out here does? Why do some people make the decisions that they make? Why is a woman in love with a car? Like, in love. I don't want to say much more than that, but there's much more than that. To me, all of those are very secondary to the experience that they make. The experience of seeing a hateful main character with no regard for human life, then clashing with a character who is losing all meaning in his, and he craves for somebody to care for, to cling to, and how those two characters affect and change each other. What roles are they filling for each other? When do those roles struggle to maintain their integrity? The line of who they are to each other blurring and struggling to find solid ground. Not to mention the individual journey these characters take and the way you can't read their mind and can only infer as to why they do what they do to the best of your abilities. You package this with the opposing character to our main character, who is a man who is successful in his career as a fireman and leader, or captain in this case, in this context, slowly and internally coming undone due to a heavy grief that he carries, due to his aging body and his waning strength. He delusionally attaches himself to someone that has no true regard for human life, that seems to act without any meaningful or apparent purpose, who is wayward and empty. And you get a very interesting watch with a beautiful scene involving an overdose. I won't give more details than that. And another one involving lots of men dancing to a Future Islands banger. This one gets an 8 out of 10. Raw, directed by Julia Ducournau. And speaking of challenging, I gave Julia Ducournau's directorial debut a watch, a movie by the name of Raw. Much like Titane, it's really not what you expect it to be, like, at all. Positives for this movie would include the atmosphere, the setting. It's a college setting and it feels, cold, foreign, ordinary. But if that wasn't enough, it's also brutalist, which I dislike brutalist architecture. Nothing here ever really feels warm or joyous. The freshmen are treated like shit by the upperclassmen. We really only ever get to see at most 2 professors for a very brief period of time. One of them openly disliking of Juliet, the main character, and the other is just a talking background head. So we get to see and feel the foreignness of this environment through Juliet's eyes, and we get to follow her journey through her first week at veterinary college, which is known as Rush Week. And man, do these vet students go hard, you guys. The setting, which is free from, supervisory adults apparently, allows for these young adults to roam free as rambunctiously and chaotically as they want in their free time. On the first day there, Juliet finds out her request for a female roommate was fulfilled by the college with a gay man, implying a sort of carelessness to the administrative side of things. He ends up being a really great friend to her and is essentially the only warmth in this movie. On their first night there, the students get hazed in the middle of the night by having their belongings thrown everywhere, even out the window, including mattresses. Excuse me? In real life, I know there'd be some fights breaking out. Like, have to. But not at this school. Nope, no ma'am. At this school, you either conform with the Rush Week activities or you're considered a reject. And that's sort of what this movie touches on. It places essentially fetuses in a microcosm of society where there are hierarchies, rituals, agreements, spoken and unspoken, protocols, etc. And you get to see the way people change in their pursuit of belonging somewhere. The negatives with this movie is that, spoiler alert, there's a textual layer of cannibalism that at times almost looks like an allegory for eating disorders, but it's never really made clear, and honestly, this was what held the movie back for me. I think if we had just stuck to Euphoria, the vet school edition, and seen the horrors of what that can do to growing minds, that could be horrific enough on its own. But as it stands, the movie throws a lot of hard to watch or stomach moments of grotesque and disturbing imagery, which I can get behind. It just wasn't executed in the way that I thought it would in this particular story. And I do mean that. This exact story could have had cannibalism and whatnot in it, and that definitely could have been something. But the way it's plugged in here specifically threw me all the way off by the end. This one gets a 5 out of 10.